mother's body is designed to be the ultimate sanctuary, a silent agreement between two lives where every pulse of the heart serves as a promise of protection. Yet within the very fluid that sustains that life, a strange and quiet war can sometimes unfold. It is a biological paradox that defies the standard narrative of evolution. A woman's immune system, normally programmed to identify and nurture the growing life within her, suddenly perceives that life as a foreign invader, a molecular intruder to be dismantled and expelled. This is the reality of rhesus incompatibility, a phenomenon where the presence or absence of a single, tiny protein on the surface of a red blood cell can turn the womb into a battlefield. It is a mystery written in the crimson ink of our veins, an anomaly that suggests we are not all as identical as the textbooks might lead us to believe. What if I told you that a significant portion of the human population carries a genetic signature that seems to lack a fundamental link to our primate ancestors, a missing piece of the biological puzzle that shouldn't, by the laws of natural selection, even exist? We are taught that we are a single species, a unified branch on the tree of life. But the deeper we look into the microscopic architecture of our blood, the more it feels as though we are a mosaic of different stories, some of which began in places we have yet to map. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly what this is for. So get comfortable, maybe subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing Tokyo at dawn, London at midnight, all experiencing the same mystery together. The night is still now. The world outside your window has slowed to a rhythmic hum, and in this quiet space, we can begin to untangle the threads of a story that began long before the first cities were built. In the year 1937, within the sterile, hushed laboratories of New York, two scientists named Carl Landsteiner and Alexander Wiener were peering through microscopes, trying to understand why certain blood transfusions were failing so catastrophically. They were working with the blood of the rhesus macaque, a small, inquisitive primate, and they discovered a specific antigen, a protein that lived on the surface of the monkey's red blood cells. When they tested human blood, they found that the vast majority of us, about 85%, carried this same protein. We called them Rh positive, a nod to the little monkey that helped us see ourselves more clearly. But it was the remaining 15% that created the silence in the room. This minority of the human race lacked the protein entirely. They were Rh negative. They were, in a sense, defined by an absence, a void in their genetic code where a universal primate trait should have been. The air in those early 20th century laboratories must have felt heavy with the weight of this realization. It wasn't just a medical curiosity. It was a genealogical ghost. If we evolved from the same ancestors as the rhesus macaque, why did a specific group of humans suddenly lose a protein that had been preserved for millions of years across the primate lineage? In the natural world, traits that complicate reproduction, like the Rh negative factor, are usually filtered out by the relentless sieve of evolution. And yet, this blood type persisted. It didn't just survive. It carved out a home for itself in specific corners of the globe, waiting to be noticed. The shadows of the laboratory give way to the mist-covered peaks of the Pyrenees, the rugged mountain range that forms a natural fortress between France and Spain. Here, Tucked away in the high valleys and secluded coastlines live the Basque people. They are a demographic outlier that has puzzled historians and geneticists for centuries. Their language, Euskara, is a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives on the entire planet. It is a linguistic island in a sea of Indo-European tongues. But it is their blood that truly whispers of an ancient, separate origin. Among the Basque, the frequency of Rh negative blood reaches the highest levels found anywhere in the world, with some communities seeing nearly 35% of their population carrying this rare trait. Standing in those mountains, where the wind carries the scent of damp stone and wild thyme, one can almost feel the presence of a history that predates the modern world. The Basque were there before the Romans, before the Celts, perhaps even before the first farmers arrived from the east. They are a remnant of a forgotten Europe, and their blood is the most enduring record of that survival. When a Basque mother with Rh negative blood conceived a child with an Rh positive father, her body would often react as if it were being attacked by an infection. Her immune system would create antibodies to seek out and destroy the foreign rhesus proteins in the baby's blood. It is a tragic, beautiful irony. The very mechanism designed to keep the mother healthy was turned against the continuation of her own lineage. In the modern world, we have treatments for this, medical interventions that quiet the immune system and allow these children to be born healthy. But for thousands of years, this was not the case. Every Rh negative community was a community engaged in a slow, generational struggle against its own biology. And yet, they did not disappear. They thrived in their isolation, protected by the mountains and the sea, preserving a genetic code that felt increasingly alien to the world expanding around them. The scale of this mystery shifts when we move from the rugged terrain of the Pyrenees to the microscopic level of the DNA molecule itself. Inside the nucleus of every cell, the RHD gene sits on the first chromosome. In Rh positive individuals, this gene is present and active, cranking out the instructions to build the rhesus protein. In Rh negative individuals, the gene isn't just mutated or broken. In many cases, it is simply gone. It is a total deletion, a clean break in the sequence. It is as if a page was neatly torn out of the book of life. Scientists look at this deletion and ask, when did the page go missing? And more importantly, why? Some suggest it was a random accident of history, a founder effect, where a small group of early humans, isolated by ice or geography, carried this mutation and passed it on to their descendants. Others look at the way the Rh negative factor interacts with certain diseases and wonder if it provided a hidden advantage, perhaps a resistance to a long-forgotten plague or a parasite that once ravaged the ancient world. In this view, the absence of the protein was actually a shield, a biological cleverness that allowed a small group of survivors to walk through a fire that consumed everyone else as the world outside settles into the deepest part of the night. It is worth reflecting on the nature of these genetic echoes. We often think of our history as a series of dates, battles, and kings, but the most profound history is the one we carry in our circulation. Our blood is a library of every environment our ancestors ever inhabited, every hardship they endured, and every strange mutation that allowed them to survive another winter. To be Rh negative is to carry a physical reminder of a time when the human story was much more fractured and mysterious than it is today. not just a single, monolithic species moving in a straight line through time. We are a collection of divergent paths that occasionally cross, a series of experiments conducted by nature over hundreds of thousands of years. The Rh-negative protein, or rather the lack of it, is a marker of one of those paths, a trail that leads back to a group of people who stood apart, who lived on the edges of the known world, and whose very existence challenged the boundaries of what it meant to be human. The silence of the night is not an empty thing. It is a space where these old stories can finally be heard. The ticking of a clock, the soft rustle of sheets, the distant sound of the wind, they all serve as a backdrop to the quiet pulse of the blood moving through your veins, a rhythm that has been steady since the dawn of our kind. Whether your blood carries the mark of the rhesus macaque or bears the silent signature of the Rh-negative deletion, you are a part of this ancient, unfolding tapestry. We are all time travelers, carrying the chemical remnants of the Paleolithic into the 21st century, our bodies serving as the vessels for a legacy we are only beginning to comprehend. History is rarely a loud or sudden thing. It is more often a slow accumulation of small details, a gradual layering of moments that eventually form the solid ground we stand upon. In the same way, the story of our blood is not told in headlines, but in the quiet, persistent survival of traits that should have vanished long ago. As we prepare to move deeper into the past, into the migrations and the ice ages that shaped these lineages, let the weight of that survival settle over you. There is a profound comfort in knowing that the mysteries of our origin are still tucked away inside us, waiting for the world to grow quiet enough for them to speak. The mountains of the Pyrenees remain dark, their peaks touching the stars, holding the secrets of the Basque and the Rh-negative protein in a cold, eternal embrace. Time does not move there the way it moves in the cities. It lingers in the stone, in the soil, much like the genetic markers linger in the blood of the people who call those mountains home. We are all shaped by what is missing as much as by what is present, defined by the gaps in our history and the silent spaces in our code. It is in those gaps that the true essence of our journey is found, a journey that continues through the dark, through the blood, and through the endless turning cycles of the world. The transition from a world of sunlight and warmth to a landscape of eternal frost was not a sudden event, but a slow, creeping silencing of the earth that defined the Upper Paleolithic 35,000 years ago. In this era, the European continent was a vast, white expanse, a place where the survival of a tribe depended on the microscopic efficiency of their bodies. As the glaciers pushed southward, they carved out more than just valleys. They created biological islands, pockets of humanity isolated by walls of ice and frozen rivers. It is within these secluded sanctuaries of the deep past that a singular event occurred, a molecular glitch, a silent deletion in the genetic code that would eventually distinguish a small percentage of the human race from the rest of the world. To look at a strand of DNA is to look at a bridge built over eons. But for the ancestors of the Rh-negative lineage, that bridge underwent a structural change. In the quiet of a cave or the shadow of a limestone cliff, a child was born without the Rhd protein. This wasn't a visible change. There were no outward signs of this internal departure. The child breathed the same biting air, hunted the same reindeer, and gathered the same hardy lichen as their kin. Yet, beneath the skin, the red blood cells were clean of the rhesus antigen, marking the beginning of a divergence that would baffle modern science. This was the birth of the Rh negative phenotype, an evolutionary no whispered into the void of a yes. The environment of the Ice Age was a harsh tutor, favoring those who could adapt to limited resources and intense physical stress. Geneticists often look at the Rh negative trait and wonder if the deletion provided a hidden advantage in this frozen world. Perhaps the absence of that specific protein on the cell surface made these individuals less susceptible to certain viruses that thrived in the damp, crowded conditions of cave dwellings. Evolution rarely preserves a trait that complicates the survival of newborns, unless it offers a profound benefit to the adults who carry it. In the microscopic theater of the bloodstream, a war was being waged against invisible enemies, and the Rh negative mutation may have been the armor that allowed a small group of hunter-gatherers to endure while others faded into the permafrost. As these nomadic groups moved across the tundra, they were not alone. The European landscape was a mosaic of human variations. To the south and east, the ancestors of the Neolithic farmers were beginning their long, slow migration from the Near East, bringing with them the dawn of agriculture and a different genetic profile, one that was almost entirely Rh positive. For millennia, these two worlds existed in parallel. The original hunter-gatherers of the West, carrying their rare blood and their ancient ways, and the encroaching waves of farmers, carrying seeds and a more common biological heritage. The meeting of these two groups was not just a clash of cultures, but a mixing of two different chemical histories. Imagine a night in a valley that would one day be known as the Dordogne. The firelight flickers against the damp stone walls, casting long, dancing shadows of bison and deer. The people gathered here are the old Europeans, the Cro-Magnons, whose lineage had remained largely untouched by the migrations from the east. Their blood was a closed circuit, a genetic reservoir where the Rh negative trait could flourish and become concentrated. Because they lived in small, tight-knit clans, the frequency of this rare blood type grew. It wasn't an anomaly to them. It was simply the way they were built. They were the silent architects of a biological legacy that would one day be pushed to the very edges of the continent. The pressure of the ice began to lift, but the pressure of the new arrivals did not. As the climate warmed and the forests returned, the Neolithic farmers moved further into the heart of Europe. They brought with them the stability of the harvest, but they also brought a genetic tide that threatened to wash away the unique signatures of the original inhabitants. In the grand scale of human migration, the Rh negative protein is a marker of resistance. It is a sign of those who were there first, those who retreated into the mountains of the Pyrenees, the highlands of Scotland, and the rugged coasts of the Atlantic to preserve their identity. This was not a conscious choice, but a geographical destiny. The old Europeans were pushed into the corners of the map, into places where the soil was too rocky for the farmer's plow, and the weather too fierce for those accustomed to the warmth of the Levant. In these refuges, the Rh negative gene was shielded from the dilution of the larger Rh positive populations. It became a biological fortress, a chemical memory of a time before the world became crowded. When we find high concentrations of Rh negative blood today, we are looking at a map of where the Ice Age survivors made their last stand. There is a haunting beauty in the idea that a simple absence of a protein can act as a lighthouse, signaling across 30,000 years. It tells us that history is not just written by the winners, the empires, or the great civilizations, but by the quiet persistence of a genetic sequence. The people who carried this blood through the long winters of the Paleolithic were not aware they were carrying a mystery. They were simply living, breathing, and mourning their losses. They faced the same maternal-fetal conflict that we understand today, likely losing second and third children to a sickness they could neither see nor explain. Yet they continued. Their survival is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit when faced with the inexplicable. The molecular deletion of the RHD gene is a reminder that we are all, in some way, the product of a mistake that worked. In the sterile language of genetics, it is a loss of function mutation, but in the poetic language of history, it is a badge of endurance. It is the signature of a group that refused to be fully absorbed, a lineage that carried the echo of the glaciers into the modern age. As the Neolithic Revolution transformed the face of the earth, turning wilderness into pasture and hunters into herders, the Rh-negative blood remained a hidden subterranean river, flowing beneath the surface of the New World. The shift from the microscopic to the global perspective reveals a planet that is constantly being reshaped by the movement of people and the mixing of their essences. We often view the past as a series of static images, like the paintings on a cave wall, but it was a fluid, shifting reality of constant movement. The Rh-negative hunters were the original inhabitants of a world that was rapidly disappearing, and their blood is the most enduring artifact they left behind. It is more permanent than stone tools, more revealing than ancient pottery, and more intimate than any story told around a fire. As the stars shift in the night sky, reflecting the same patterns seen by those ancient hunters, we realize that time is a thin veil. The same blood that flowed through a mother in a Paleolithic shelter flows through millions of people today. The struggle to survive the frost, the mystery of the fading child, and the isolation of the mountain peaks are all etched into the very core of our being. We are the descendants of a narrow escape, the inheritors of a genetic gamble that paid off in the most unlikely of ways. The world of the Ice Age may have been cold and silent, but it was not empty. It was filled with the heat of human life and the complexity of a biology that was already beginning to diverge. The Rh-negative story is a reminder that even in our most basic components, we carry the scars and the triumphs of those who came before us. We are never truly starting over. We are simply continuing a conversation that began in the dark 35,000 years ago among a people who learned how to turn an absence into a legacy. History is the long, slow cooling of a once molten world, a process where the layers of the past are folded into the present. The Ice Age survivors left us their blood, a crimson thread that connects us to a time of giants and glaciers. In the quiet of the night, we can feel the pulse of that connection, a steady beat that has survived the rise and fall of countless suns, carrying the silent mystery of the Rh-negative protein forward into a future that is still being written. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, consider the immense journey that your own genetic code has taken to reach this moment. It has crossed frozen continents, survived famines, and navigated the complex social shifts of thousands of generations. The Rh-negative story is just one chapter in that epic, a chapter defined by a refusal to disappear and a unique way of existing in the world. It is a quiet, powerful reminder that within every one of us lies a history so vast and so intricate that it can only be fully understood in the stillness of the night, when the noise of the modern world finally fades away. The glaciers have long since retreated, leaving behind the lakes and mountains we know today. But the biological marks of that era remain. They are the subtle differences that make our species a fascinating mosaic of experiences. We are the children of the frost and the sun, the farmers and the hunters, the presence and the absence. In this balance, we find the true depth of our story, a story that is as much about what we have lost as what we have kept. If you would like to explore the linguistic and genetic fortress of the Pyrenees in more detail, let me know. Or perhaps we should move on to the maritime migration routes of the ancient seafaring cultures. The jagged silhouette of the Pyrenees rises like a spine of granite and limestone between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, a formidable barrier that has dictated the flow of human movement for tens of thousands of years. In these high-altitude corridors, where the air is thin and the silence is absolute, time seems to lose its forward momentum. It is here that a linguistic and genetic fortress was constructed, not out of stone walls, but out of a profound and enduring isolation. The Basque people, known to themselves as the Euskaldunak, have inhabited these valleys since a time that predates the memory of the rest of Europe. They are the keepers of a biological secret, a reservoir of Rh-negative blood that remains the highest concentration on the planet, a living testament to a world that existed before the first wheel turned or the first bronze sword was forged. To walk through a Basque village at twilight is to step into a sensory anomaly. The language spoken here, Euskara, sounds like nothing else on Earth. It is a linguistic island, a language isolate that bears no relationship to the Latin-derived Spanish or French that surrounds it, nor to the Germanic, Slavic, or Indo-European tongues that define the continent. It is a window into a pre-Indo-European past, a remnant of the speech used by the original hunter-gatherers who repopulated Europe after the Great Ice. Just as their language refused to be colonized by the speech of empires, their blood refused to be diluted by the genetic waves of the Bronze Age. In the veins of the Basque, the absence of the rhesus protein is not a rarity. It is a defining characteristic, a molecular badge of their ancient and unbroken lineage. The geography of the Pyrenees served as a natural filtration system, while the fertile plains of Europe were being transformed by the arrival of Neolithic farmers and later by the warring migrations of the steppe people. The Basque remained tucked away in their steep-sided valleys and hidden coastal inlets. This isolation was a shield, protecting a unique genetic profile from the homogenization that occurred elsewhere. In a world that was rapidly becoming Rh positive due to the influx of new populations, the Basque stayed Rh negative. They were a biological time capsule, preserving a chemical heritage that had once been more widespread across the old Europe of the Paleolithic. This preservation was not without its costs. Within these isolated communities, the biological conflict between Rh negative mothers and Rh-positive infants, often the result of marriages with outsiders, was a silent shadow. In the centuries before modern medicine, a Basque woman might successfully bear her first child, only for her body to remember the foreign protein and reject every subsequent pregnancy. This phenomenon, often interpreted through the lens of folklore as a curse or a spiritual trial, likely reinforced the cultural tendency toward endogamy, marrying within the group. By choosing partners from their own valleys, they inadvertently minimized the risk of rhesus incompatibility, further concentrating the Rh negative trait and strengthening the genetic walls of their mountain fortress. The philosophical weight of being a living fossil in a rapidly changing world is a heavy one. The Basque do not see themselves as an anomaly, but as the original heartbeat of the land. Their folklore is populated by giants like the Gentilac, who are said to have lived in the mountains before the arrival of Christianity, and who eventually disappeared as the new people took over the earth. In a sense, the Gentilac are a metaphorical representation of the Rh negative hunter-gatherers, a different kind of human, possessed of a different strength, eventually pushed to the margins by the sheer weight of numbers. To carry Rh negative blood today is to carry the literal, physical essence of those giants, a genetic memory of a time when humanity was a smaller, more diverse collection of tribes. As the sun sets over the Bay of Biscay, the water turning a deep, bruised purple, one can imagine the ancient Basque looking out at the same horizon. They were people of the sea as much as the mountains, skilled mariners who may have traveled far beyond their visible shores. Some researchers suggest that their high Rh negative frequency isn't just a result of isolation, but of a specific evolutionary path that favored this blood type in maritime environments. There is a curious correlation between Rh negative populations and ancient seafaring cultures, from the Berbers of North Africa to the mysterious Guanches of the Canary Islands. Perhaps the missing protein offered a subtle advantage in the damp, salt-heavy air of the coast. Or perhaps it was simply the mark of a people who were brave enough to live on the edge of the world. The microscopic detail of the blood cell and the massive scale of the mountain range are inextricably linked in this story. The Pyrenees did not just provide a home. They provided the conditions for a specific kind of human history to endure. When we look at the DNA of a modern Basque individual, we are looking at a map of survival. We see the exclusion of the rhesus protein, the presence of unique HLA markers, and the absence of the genetic signals that define the rest of modern Europe. It is a biological signature that says, we were here first, we remained, we did not change. This refusal to change is a rare thing in the human story. We are a species of constant mixing, a blur of migration and interbreeding. But the Basque are the exception that proves the rule. They remind us that history is not always a story of progress and expansion. Sometimes it is a story of holding your ground. Their valleys were the one place where the tide of the Indo-European expansion broke and receded, while the rest of the continent was learning the languages of the East and the religions of the South. The Basque kept their own tongue and their own blood. In the quiet of the night, the concept of a genetic fortress takes on a more intimate meaning. It is the idea that our bodies are not just ours, but are the temporary vessels for an incredibly ancient and resilient heritage. If you carry Rh negative blood, you are part of this mountain-guarded legacy. You are a descendant of the people who saw the glaciers retreat and the forests return, who heard the first bells of the Bronze Age and chose to keep their own rhythm. You are a biological outlier in a world of averages, a whisper of the Paleolithic surviving in the age of the machine. The transitions of history are rarely clean. The old Europe did not vanish overnight. It lingered in the high places and the cold corners. The Basque are the most visible remnant of that lingering. Their existence challenges our understanding of human evolution as a simple, linear progression. It suggests, instead, a series of pockets, independent experiments in human biology, some of which were swallowed by the passage of time, while others, like the Basque, found a way to endure. They are the guardians of a genetic mystery that science is still trying to decode, a mystery that begins with a missing protein and ends with the very definition of what it means to belong to a place. As you lie there, the world around you fading into the soft textures of sleep, consider the silence of those mountain valleys. Imagine the centuries of winter snows covering the peaks, the spring thaws feeding the rivers, and the generations of people who lived their entire lives within the sight of those same stone walls. They were not concerned with the rhesus factor or genetic isolates. They were concerned with the harvest, the herd, and the family. And yet, every time a child was born, they were either continuing or challenging a biological tradition that was already ancient when the pyramids were built. The blood is a river that flows through time, and the Basque are a deep, still pool where the waters of the distant past have remained clear. In a world that is constantly being stirred and muddied by the movements of billions, there is something deeply grounding about the existence of such a place. It reminds us that there are parts of the human experience that are resistant to the erosion of time, parts of ourselves that remain connected to the very beginning of our journey. The fortress of the Pyrenees is not just a physical location. It is a state of being. It is the persistence of the unique in the face of the universal. As we move forward in this story, drifting from the mountains to the microscopic search for the founder individual, let the image of those rugged peaks stay with you. They are the silent witnesses to a biological drama that has been playing out for 30,000 years, a drama written in a language we are only just beginning to translate, and in a blood type that refuses to be forgotten. The night deepens and the air grows colder, mirroring the ancient winters of the high Pyrenees. The stories of the past are not dead. They are simply waiting for the right moment to be remembered. In the pulse of your own heart, in the quiet flow of your own breath, you are carrying the weight of that endurance. You are a part of the fortress, a part of the mystery, and a part of the long, slow history of a species that has always found a way to survive the dark. The stars above the mountains are the same stars that guided the first hunters home, and they are the same stars that watch over us now. In this shared gaze, the thousands of years between us and our ancestors seem to dissolve. We are all breathing the same air, facing the same mysteries, and carrying the same ancient blood through the corridors of time. Rest now and let the image of the mountains fade into the distance, knowing that the history they protect is safe within the very cells of your body. The landscape of our DNA is not a static map. It is a shifting, breathing record of every environment our ancestors ever touched. A microscopic wilderness where some paths are well worn and others are lost to the overgrowth of time. To zoom into the first chromosome of a human being is to descend into a world of chemical syntax, where a single deletion, a missing sequence of instructions, can fundamentally alter how an individual interacts with the world. For decades, the prevailing narrative of our species has been one of a unified departure from the warmth of the African cradle, a singular exodus that carried the blueprint of humanity across the globe. Yet, as we scrutinize the out-of-Africa model through the lens of the racist factor, the story begins to fracture into something far more complex and haunting. In the sun-drenched savannas of the Pleistocene, the ancestors of every person alive today walked with a blood profile that was almost universally Rh positive. Even today, in the heart of sub-Saharan Africa, the Rh negative trait is nearly non-existent, occurring in less than 1% of the population. This suggests that the protein on the surface of our red blood cells is not just a human trait, but a foundational one, a biological constant that we shared with the great migrations of the past. If the Rh negative factor were a part of our original toolkit, we would expect to see its fingerprint scattered evenly across the continent of our birth. Instead, we see a void. The absence of the protein appears suddenly and sharply as we trace the human journey into the colder, more isolated corners of Western Europe. The dust of the Neanderthal caves in Siberia and Croatia offers a silent rebuttal to the idea that this mutation was an ancient gift from our cousins. When scientists at the Max Planck Institute successfully sequenced the genomes of Neanderthals and their mysterious Eastern relatives, the Denisovans, they were looking for the bridges that connect us. They found that we shared the genes for skin pigment, for immune responses, and for the capacity for speech. But when they looked at the RHD gene, they found a different story. These archaic humans, who had lived in Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years before Homo sapiens arrived, were Rh positive. Their blood carried the same ancestral protein that we see in the primates of the forest. The Rh negative deletion was not something we inherited from the old ones of the ice. It was a departure that belonged solely to us, a new direction taken by a specific branch of the modern human family. The search for the founder individual, the one person in whom this genetic page was first torn out, leads us into a realm of deep mathematical wonder. Somewhere, perhaps 30,000 years ago, in a tribe sheltered by the limestone cliffs of a forgotten river valley, a child was born with a fundamental difference. In this child, the two RHD genes that should have been inherited from the parents were either missing or silenced. This single life was the origin point of a ripple that would eventually expand to encompass 15% of the modern world. We can only imagine the quiet dignity of that existence, a life lived without the knowledge that their blood was a biological revolutionary, a tiny deviation that would survive the rise and fall of every empire yet to be built. This mutation, the founder effect, is a phenomenon of isolation. For a trait that complicates reproduction to survive, it must occur within a small, closed loop of humanity. In a large, interconnected population, the Rh negative trait would likely have been drowned out, a recessive whisper lost in the roar of the majority. But in the secluded pockets of the Paleolithic, where groups of fewer than 100 people lived and died within the same 50-mile radius, the whisper could become a chant. If the founders' descendants were healthy, if they were resilient, and if they stayed together, their unique blood could become the signature of an entire tribe. The microscopic origins of our diversity are often found in these errors of replication. We tend to think of mutations as flaws, as breaks in a perfect design, but in the long view of the nighttime historian, they are the very engines of our survival. The Rh negative deletion represents a moment where the human species experimented with its own architecture. It is a reminder that we are not a finished product, but a work in progress, a mosaic of lineages that have diverged and reconvened over the vast spans of geological time. The fact that this trait appeared so late in our history, and only after we had left the ancestral lands of Africa, suggests that the environment of Europe acted as a crucible, a place where the rules of biology were being subtly rewritten. As we move from the macro history of the species to the granular detail of the genome, the perspective shifts once more. We see that humanity is not a single, solid block, but a collection of distinct chemical experiences. To be Rh negative is to occupy a specific niche in that experience, to carry a biological marker that distinguishes you not only from the rest of your species, but from the very lineage of the primates themselves. It is a form of genetic loneliness, a physical echo of a time when the world was much larger and our tribes were much smaller. The silence of the laboratory, where these sequences are analyzed, is a far cry from the wind-swept plains where the mutation first took hold. Yet, the data tells a story that is as vivid as any legend. It tells us that the appearance of the Rh negative factor in Western Europe was a sudden, localized event, a paradigm shift in our biology that occurred in the blink of an eye when measured against the millions of years of our evolution. It challenges the textbook myth that all human traits are simply variations on a theme established in the African savanna. It suggests instead that our journey was marked by sudden leaps, by radical departures, and by the persistent survival of the different. The weight of this history is felt in the way we classify ourselves. We use the labels of nationality, language, and culture, but beneath those layers we are defined by the presence or absence of a protein that is older than the mountains. The struggle to understand the Rh negative protein is, at its heart, a struggle to understand the limits of our own commonality. If our most ancient cousins didn't have it, and our ancestors in the cradle of life didn't have it, then it is a uniquely modern mystery, a secret that we began to keep only after we had started to wander into the dark. The time traveler looks back at these early European tribes and sees not just a group of hunters, but a laboratory of the future. Each small band was a unique genetic experiment, carrying its own set of deletions, insertions, and variations. Most of these experiments failed, lost to the unforgiving pressures of the Ice Age, or the eventual blending with larger groups. But the Rh negative experiment succeeded. It carved out a permanent place in the human story, a testament to the fact that even a missing piece can be a vital part of the whole. This realization brings with it a certain melancholic beauty. We are the survivors of 1,000 narrow escapes, the inheritors of a genetic code that has been edited by frost, by famine, and by the sheer chance of who happened to be born in a particular cave on a particular night. The Rh negative protein is a ghost in the machine, a sign that our history is more porous and more surprising than we often dare to imagine. It reminds us that every person we pass on the street is a walking archive, a vessel for a story that began with a single, silent mutation 30,000 years ago. The microscopic scale of this mystery does not diminish its grandeur. It amplifies it. To think that the entire history of the Rh negative people, the Basque, the Celts, the Berbers, and the millions of others across the globe, can be traced back to a single moment of genetic divergence is to touch the very hem of the cosmic. It is a reminder of how interconnected we are, and yet how profoundly distinct. We are all moving through the same night, but we are doing so with different maps written into our very cells. As the light of the stars travels across the light years to reach us, so too has this genetic signal traveled across the generations. It has survived the crossing of oceans, the building of cathedrals, and the birth of the digital age. It remains as a silent, objective fact, a piece of reality that doesn't care about our theories or our myths. It simply is, and in its existence, we find a reason to pause, to breathe, and to marvel at the sheer, improbable complexity of being alive. The history of our blood is a river that flows through a landscape of shadow and light, a river that has been diverted, dammed, and expanded by the movements of the earth itself. We are the current of that river, carrying the silt of the past into the ocean of the future. And as the night deepens, we realize that the mysteries of our DNA are not puzzles to be solved, but stories to be inhabited. Stories that connect us to the silent founder who once looked out at a cold European sky and had no idea that their life would echo through the veins of the world forever. The transition from the microscopic world of the gene to the global scale of human migration is a movement from the intimate to the infinite. We are both the tiny deletion and the massive diaspora. We are the individual and the species. In this duality, we find the true scale of our existence, a scale that is both humbling and vast, a scale that invites us to let go of the small concerns of the day and rest in the enduring, silent reality of our shared and yet divergent past. The study of these ancient mutations is like listening to a low-frequency hum that has been playing since the dawn of time. It is always there, beneath the noise of our lives, a steady reminder of where we came from and the strange ways we have changed. It tells us that even in the stillness of the night, we are part of a grand, unfolding drama, a drama where every red blood cell is a character and every gene is a line of dialogue in a play that has no end. The scent of salt spray and the rhythmic grinding of pebbles against the shore mark the boundary where the solid history of the land meets the fluid mystery of the ocean. While the mountains of the Pyrenees acted as a silent vault for the Rh negative signature, the sea served a different purpose. It was not a barrier, but a vast, shimmering highway that allowed this rare biological ink to be traced along the ragged edges of the world. Along the coast of North Africa, where the Atlas Mountains rise like granite teeth to bite the clouds, the Berber people, the Amazigh, carry within them a frequency of Rh negative blood that mirrors the Basque of the north. This is not a coincidence of the sun or the soil, but a remnant of a maritime corridor that once hugged the Atlantic fringe, a path carved by sailors who navigated by the stars long before the first maps were ever drawn. The Atlas Mountains provide a sanctuary of cool air and jagged shadows, a vertical world that remained largely insulated from the sweeping migrations of the Phoenicians, Romans, and Arabs who dominated the Mediterranean plains. In these high, terraced villages, the Rh-negative trait persisted with a quiet tenacity, reaching levels as high as 30% in certain isolated tribes. Geneticists looking at these populations see a reflection of the same old European hunters who once inhabited the caves of France and Spain. It suggests that the Mediterranean was once a ring of shared ancestry, a circle of people who preferred the rugged coastline and the high peaks to the open heart of the continent. The Berbers are a living link in this chain, a southern anchor for a lineage that has always sought the protection of the periphery. Moving westward from the African coast, the obsidian waves of the Atlantic lead to a cluster of volcanic peaks rising abruptly from the deep. The Canary Islands. Before the Spanish arrived in the 15th century, these islands were home to the Guanches, a people whose origins remain one of the great enigmas of the ancient world. They were a Neolithic culture living in a world of stone tools and elaborate mummification. Yet, when their remains are analyzed, the results are startling. The Guanches possessed an incredibly high frequency of the Rh-negative deletion, coupled with physical traits, tall stature, fair skin, and light eyes, that seemed entirely out of place in the subtropical Atlantic. They were a genetic island in every sense of the word, a population that had been sheared off from the mainland and preserved in the amber of geographic isolation. The voyage of a gene across the water is a slow, multi-generational drift. It is found in the way a small group of explorers, perhaps blown off course, or seeking a land free of the expanding Neolithic farmers, settled on these volcanic shores and allowed their unique blood to become the blueprint for an entire civilization. In the silence of the Guanche burial caves, where the air is dry and smells of ancient dust, the DNA of these people tells a story of a lost maritime world. It is a story of a peoples of the sea who were not just raiders or invaders, but biological pioneers. They carried the Rh-negative trait in their vessels like a precious, invisible cargo, planting it on islands and coastal outposts from the Maghreb to the Hebrides. This Atlantic corridor was a series of interconnected refuges. To follow the trail of the Rh-negative protein is to follow the coastline of Western Europe and Northern Africa, tracing a path that avoids the interior of the continent. It suggests a culture that lived with its back to the land and its face to the horizon. These were the people who understood the currents, the seasonal shifts of the wind, and the way the tides could be used to leapfrog from one rocky headland to the next. For them, the sea was a preservative, a force that kept the encroaching Rh-positive populations of the East at a distance. As long as they remained on the edge, their blood remained their own. The scale of this dispersal is staggering when viewed from the perspective of deep time. We see the same genetic markers appearing in the west of Ireland, the highlands of Scotland, the Basque country, and the Berber heartlands. It is as if a single ancient tapestry was torn into pieces and scattered along the Atlantic rim. Each piece, each community, developed its own language, its own myths, and its own traditions, but the underlying chemistry remained identical. They were the children of the coast, the inheritors of a maritime heritage that predates the dawn of recorded history. They were the original navigators, those who saw the ocean not as a void, but as a bridge. There is a profound melancholy in the realization that so much of this seafaring history has been erased by the rising tides and the shifting sands. The ports they built, the ships they sailed, and the songs they sang have largely dissolved into the salt air. All that remains is the blood. The Rh negative factor is the only artifact that has survived the corrosion of the centuries, a molecular fossil that proves these disparate groups were once part of a single, fluid movement of humanity. It is a reminder that our ancestors were far more mobile and interconnected than we often give them credit for. They were not trapped in their valleys. They were exploring the limits of their world. The transition from a mountain-dwelling culture to a maritime one is a shift in the very soul of a people. In the mountains, survival is about endurance and the preservation of the old ways. On the sea, survival is about adaptability and the courage to face the unknown. The Rh negative lineages seem to have mastered both. They held the high ground in the Pyrenees and the Atlas, and they held the distant shores of the Canaries and the British Isles. They were the specialists of the difficult places, the environments that demanded a different kind of resilience. Their blood is the record of that tenacity, a sign of a group that could thrive where others faltered. As we look at the modern map of Rh negative distribution, we are seeing the ghost of an ancient maritime empire. It was an empire without a capital, without a central government, and without a written code. Its boundaries were defined by the reach of the salt spray, and its laws were written in the double helix of the DNA molecule. Every time we encounter a high concentration of this blood type, we are standing at a former port of call in this invisible network. We are touching the hem of a history that operated on a scale of tens of thousands of years, a history that viewed the entire Atlantic coast as a single, contiguous home. The microscopic reality of the blood cell, lacking its rhesus crown, becomes a metaphor for this maritime existence. Just as the protein is absent from the cell, the traditional roots of these people are often absent from the mainstream historical narrative. They are defined by their departures, their isolations, and their movements across the water. To be Rh negative in an ancient context was to be a part of a specialized branch of the human family, one that was perhaps more attuned to the rhythms of the natural world than the social structures of the emerging agricultural states. They were the outliers, the ones who chose the uncertainty of the horizon over the security of the fence. The salt-sprayed history of genetic dispersal is a reminder that we are all, in some sense, the descendants of voyagers. Whether our ancestors crossed the seas in skin-covered boats or moved across the land on foot, they were all driven by a restless urge to see what lay beyond the next ridge or the next wave. The Rh negative trait is simply a more visible marker of that journey, a biological flare sent up from the past to remind us of the incredible distances we have traveled. It is a testament to the bravery of those who looked at the vast, terrifying emptiness of the Atlantic and saw a path forward. In the quiet of the night, the sound of the ocean seems to echo the pulse of this ancient movement. The waves that break against the shore tonight are the same waves that carried the Rh negative pioneers to their island homes. The water is a continuous loop, a cycle that connects every shore and every era. In the same way, our blood is a continuous loop, a cycle that connects us to the first mutation in a Paleolithic cave and the last survivor on a volcanic island. We are the current, carrying the history of the sea in our very marrow. The persistence of these rare lineages along the maritime corridors of the world is a beautiful anomaly. It suggests that there are ways of being human that do not require the conquest of territory or the building of monuments. Sometimes the most enduring legacy is simply the act of surviving in a place that no one else wanted, or finding a way to bridge the gaps between the worlds. The Rh-negative people were the masters of the gaps, the inhabitants of the spaces in between. They were the bridge builders of the ancient world, using their blood as the mortar and the ocean as the road. As we conclude this part of the journey, reflecting on the salt and the stone, let the image of the Atlantic fringe linger. It is a place of immense beauty and immense hardship, a place where the human story has always been lived at its most elemental level. The mystery of the Rh-negative protein is not just a medical or a genetic one, it is a human one. It is a story of how we move, how we settle, and how we remember. And as the night continues its slow turn, we realize that the most important stories are often the ones that are told in the quietest voices, written in the most hidden places, and carried through the most turbulent waters. The history of our species is a vast, unfinished book, and the maritime dispersal of the Rh-negative trait is one of its most fascinating chapters. It is a chapter that reminds us of the power of the sea to both isolate and connect, and the power of the blood to endure through both. There is a sense of peace in knowing that these ancient paths are still there, etched into the biology of millions of people, waiting for the moment when we are ready to follow them back to their source. For now, it is enough to acknowledge the journey, to feel the rhythm of the waves, and to honor the silent voyagers who brought us here. If you are curious about how this biological signature intersects with the massive stone monuments of the ancient world, we can turn our gaze toward the megaliths next. Or perhaps you would prefer to delve deeper into the hidden biological trade-offs that allowed this gene to survive against the relentless pressure of natural selection. The gray, lichen-crusted alignments of Karnak stretch across the fields of Brittany like rows of silent, frozen soldiers. Their origin and purpose anchored in a time so remote that the names of their builders have long since dissolved into the Atlantic mist. These granite sentinels, thousands of them standing in precise geometric patterns, mark a profound shift in the human story. The moment when the wandering lineages of the old Europe began to pin their history to the earth itself. As we overlay the maps of these megalithic wonders with the modern distribution of Rh-negative blood, a striking correlation emerges. From the windswept plains of Brittany to the mossy mounds of Ireland and the towering trilithons of Stonehenge, the geography of the great stones is almost identical to the geography of the rare protein deletion. It is here, at the intersection of biology and stone, that the physical reality of a genetic anomaly began to transform into the cultural weight of a myth. The construction of these monuments required more than just muscle. It required a stable, generational continuity, a people who remained in one place long enough to observe the subtle cycles of the stars and the slow tilt of the Earth's axis. The archaeological record reveals that the builders of the first megaliths were the descendants of those same hunter-gatherers who had survived the Ice Age in the refuges of the West. They were the primary carriers of the Rh negative signature, a population that had remained biologically distinct even as the first waves of farmers began to terrace the hillsides of the East in the shadows of Newgrange and the long barrows of the Salisbury Plain. These people left behind more than just architectural marvels. They left a genetic legacy that suggests a high degree of social stratification and biological isolation. Recent genomic studies of the remains found within these ancient tombs have begun to whisper secrets that were once thought lost to the soil. In the vaulted chambers of Carramore, in the sprawling passage tombs of the Irish coast, the DNA of the buried elite often shows a startling lack of the rhesus protein, alongside other markers of a localized, deeply entrenched lineage. This suggests that the builders of the megaliths may have viewed their own biological rarity as a mark of status or sacredness. In a world where the majority of the growing human population was becoming increasingly Rh positive through the blending of tribes, those who maintained the old blood may have seen themselves as the rightful guardians of the ancient knowledge, the architects of a connection between the soil and the sky that only they were qualified to maintain. The transition from a biological observation to a mystical belief is a subtle process, one that occurs over centuries of storytelling and shared ritual. To the ancient observer, the physical traits often associated with high Rh negative populations, fairer skin that burned or reddened in the sun, piercing light-colored eyes, and a curious resistance to certain common ailments, would have been interpreted not as a genetic variation, but as a sign of otherness. In the dim firelight of a Neolithic longhouse, a child born with the striking features of the mountain-dwelling ancestors might have been seen as having divine or noble origins. This is perhaps where the seeds of the blue blood myth were first planted. In individuals with very fair, translucent skin, the veins beneath the surface appear not as crimson, but as a deep, ethereal blue. To a culture that equated the heavens with the divine, this visual phenomenon could easily have been interpreted as a literal connection to the celestial realm, a sign that the blood of the gods flowed through the veins of their leaders. This sense of biological divinity was not just a matter of aesthetics. It was a mechanism of power. By framing their rare blood as a sacred gift, the elite lineages of the megalith building cultures could justify their isolation and their authority. They became a caste apart, a group that married within its own narrow genetic pool to preserve the purity of the line. We see the echoes of this practice in the staggering scale of the monuments they built. Structures like Silbury Hill or the Ring of Brodgar, which required the coordinated effort of thousands. Only a leadership viewed as fundamentally different from the common folk could command such devotion and labor. The Rh negative protein, in its very absence, became a presence that defined the social order of the Atlantic fringe. The arrival of the Beaker people in the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age brought a new set of tools, a new way of working metal, and a massive influx of Rh positive DNA. As the old megalithic cultures were slowly absorbed or displaced, the myths surrounding their origins did not vanish. They simply changed shape. The tall, fair-skinned builders of the stones were reimagined as the Tuatha De Danann of Irish legend, or the giants of British folklore. Beings who possessed supernatural knowledge and who eventually retreated into the hollow hills. The reality of a displaced genetic lineage was transformed into the fantasy of a magical race. The noble bloodlines of the later European dynasties would often reach back to these legends to bolster their own claims to power, weaving the rare biological reality of the Rh negative trait into a tapestry of divine right and ancient heritage. Yet, beyond the layers of myth and the romanticism of lost civilizations, the objective reality remains etched in the stones themselves. The megaliths are aligned with a precision that defies the technology of their time, tracking the solstices and equinoxes with a cold, mathematical certainty. This level of observation suggests a culture that was deeply attuned to the rhythms of the natural world, perhaps as a result of their long isolation in the environments of the West. The Rh negative lineage was not a gift from the stars, but a product of the earth, a specific adaptation to a specific set of circumstances that allowed a group of people to flourish and create a legacy that has outlasted their names. The stones stand as a physical manifestation of that endurance, a bridge between the biological past and the historical present. The connection between the blood and the stone is a reminder that we are the architects of our own meaning. We take the random mutations of our biology and the silent monuments of our ancestors, and we weave them into stories that help us navigate the dark. To the person walking among the stones of Stonehenge today, the rhesus factor is a medical detail, a note on a blood donor card. But to the person who stood there 4,000 years ago, it may have been the very essence of their identity, the proof that they belonged to a lineage that reached back to the beginning of time. We are constantly translating the language of our cells into the language of our culture, trying to find a place for the unique within the universal. As the moonlight washes over the gray granite of the alignments, it is easy to feel the weight of this long-standing mystery. The stones do not speak, and the blood that flowed through the hands that carved them is long gone. Yet the message remains. It is a message of persistence, of a group of people who looked at the vast, uncaring universe and decided to leave a mark that would never be erased. They used what they had, the stone of the earth and the blood in their veins, to build a sanctuary for their memory. In the stillness of the night, the distinction between the biological and the cultural begins to blur. We are both the monument and the builder, the myth and the reality. The study of these ancient sites and the people who built them is a lesson in the fragility of history. We know so little of their true lives, their fears, or their dreams. We have only the silent witnesses of the megaliths and the subtle markers of their DNA. But perhaps that is enough. In the absence of a written record, the blood becomes the text, and the stones become the landscape upon which that text is written. Every Rh negative individual carries a piece of this megalithic history, a biological link to the people who first learned how to measure the stars and anchor their lives to the turning of the year. It is a heritage that does not require a crown or a throne. It is a heritage of survival, of observation, and of a deep, abiding connection to the ancient foundations of the world. The stones of the Atlantic fringe will continue to stand long after our own era has faded into the dust of the future. They are the ultimate time travelers, moving through the centuries with a patient, unyielding grace. And as long as they stand, the story of the people who built them will continue to be told. not in the loud proclamations of history books, but in the quiet, persistent pulse of the lineages they left behind. The intersection of biology and stone is a place of profound silence, a place where the mysteries of the past are allowed to breathe, and where the origins of our diversity are revealed in the cold, clear light of the stars. History is not just a collection of events. It is a layering of presence, the presence of the stones in the landscape, the presence of the genes in our bodies, and the presence of the myths in our minds. All of these layers work together to create the complex, beautiful reality of the human experience. We are the inheritors of a world that was already ancient when we arrived, and we are the stewards of a biological legacy that is far older than our understanding. In the quiet of the night, we can acknowledge the depth of that legacy, feeling the connection between our own brief lives and the enduring, stone-cold weight of the past. The relationship between the Rh negative protein in the megalithic world is a testament to the fact that we have always been a species of seekers, looking for ways to transcend our own limitations. We find that transcendence in the things we build and in the ways we interpret our own biological nature. Whether through the construction of massive stone circles or the preservation of a rare genetic signature, we are always trying to find a way to stay connected to the source. The mystery remains as silent as the stones of Karnak, but it is a mystery that we carry with us, a silent companion on our journey through the deep, unfolding dark. As you reflect on the endurance of the megaliths and the bloodlines that raised them, let the scale of time settle around you like a heavy, protective cloak. There is a peace in the realization that we are part of something so vast and so ancient that our individual concerns seem to dissolve in its shadow. We are the latest chapter in a story that is as old as the mountains and as deep as the sea. A story that continues to be written in every heartbeat and every rising of the sun. The relentless machinery of natural selection is a harsh and unsentimental judge, usually discarding any genetic trait that creates a barrier to the continuation of the species. Yet, as we peer into the deep mechanics of our own survival, we encounter a mystery that seems to defy the very logic of the survival of the fittest. The Rh negative phenotype, characterized by the potential for a mother's body to reject its own offspring, should, by all standard biological accounts, have vanished long ago. In the cold, objective eyes of evolution, a trait that complicates the birth of a second child is a disadvantage that should be pruned from the human tree, and yet it persists, shimmering in the blood of millions. This persistence suggests a hidden balance, a concept known in genetics as the heterozygote advantage, where a seemingly detrimental trait offers a secret armor against an even greater threat. To understand how a negative trait becomes a positive survival strategy, we must shift our gaze from the macro history of tribes and mountains down into the microscopic world of cellular warfare. For thousands of years, humanity has been locked in a silent, unending struggle with parasites, tiny, invisible hitchhikers that navigate our tissues and manipulate our very behavior. One of the most pervasive of these is Toxoplasma gondii, a protozoan parasite that has traveled alongside humans since we first began to share our hearths with animals. While often benign in the modern world, in the ancient wilderness, Toxoplasma was a predator of the mind. It is known to slow the reaction times of those it infects, creating a subtle lethargy that, in a world of saber-toothed tigers and jagged ravines, was often a death sentence. Scientific observation has revealed a startling correlation. Individuals with Rh negative blood, or those who carry the recessive gene for it, appear to possess a heightened resistance to the effects of this parasite. In controlled studies, Rh negative individuals often maintain significantly faster reaction times when infected compared to their Rh positive counterparts. In the unforgiving environment of the Pleistocene, where a split-second delay in spotting a predator or leaping across a stream meant the difference between life and death, this microscopic edge was priceless. The maternal-fetal conflict that might claim a second child was a high price to pay. But if the trait allowed the parents and the firstborn to survive long enough to reach adulthood in a world of constant peril, the gene would endure. It was a brutal biological trade-off, a gamble made by nature to preserve the lineage against the immediate threat of the environment. This heterozygote advantage is the shadow that explains the light. It suggests that our genetic diversity is not just a collection of random accidents, but a complex portfolio of insurance policies. We see this elsewhere in the human story. The gene for sickle cell anemia, which causes immense suffering, persists because it offers protection against the ravages of malaria. The Rh negative deletion follows a similar melancholic logic. It is a scar that doubles as a shield. The very thing that made reproduction a gamble was the same thing that made the individual a more capable survivor in the wild. As we drift through the quiet hours of the night, it is humbling to realize that our presence here is the result of these ancient, difficult compromises. The hidden trade-offs of our biology tell a story of a species that has always been under siege. We are not the products of a perfect, peaceful evolution. We are the survivors of a long and bloody war against pathogens and parasites. The Rh negative blood type is a badge of that struggle. It reminds us that every weakness in our genetic code may be the byproduct of a forgotten strength. In the isolation of the mountains or the windswept reaches of the coast, where these parasites might have been more prevalent or the need for sharp reflexes more acute, the Rh negative trait found its niche. It wasn't an anomaly, it was an adaptation. This realization shifts our perspective from the mystery of the Rh negative origins to the logic of its survival. Evolution does not care about our comfort or our medical definitions of normal. It only cares about the transmission of the code to the next generation. If a mutation allows a group to navigate a parasite-infested wetland or survive a particular plague, that mutation will be carried forward, even if it brings with it a heavy burden. We are the inheritors of these burdens, walking archives of the catastrophes our ancestors outlived. The Rh negative protein, or its absence, is a silent witness to a time when the human experience was defined by the raw, visceral necessity of staying alive for just one more day. In the stillness of the dark, the idea of resistance takes on a deeper, almost philosophical meaning. We are built to resist. Our blood is designed to fight, to adapt, and to protect. The Rh negative deletion is a form of resistance that occurred at the most fundamental level of our being. It is a refusal to be susceptible, a biological no that allowed a lineage to persist against all odds. When we look at the high concentrations of this blood among the Basque or the Berbers, we are looking at the descendants of those who won the microscopic lottery. They were the ones who could think faster, move quicker, and endure longer in the face of invisible enemies. The transition from a world of predators to a world of medicine has changed the stakes, but it has not erased the history written in our veins. Today, we manage the risks of Rh incompatibility with ease, but the advantage that once allowed our ancestors to survive might still be playing out in ways we don't fully understand. Researchers continue to look for links between blood types and our susceptibility to modern ailments, from viral infections to neurological conditions. The story of the Rh negative protein is not a closed chapter. It is an ongoing investigation into the hidden machinery of human resilience. There's a quiet dignity in this biological reality. It strips away the myths of alien DNA or divine intervention and replaces them with something far more grounded and impressive: the sheer, dogged persistence of life. We are here because our ancestors were tough, because they were lucky, and because their bodies were willing to make the hard choices necessary for survival. The Rh negative trait is a reminder of the grit and the sacrifice that define our species. It is a legacy of the hunter in the brush, the mother in the cave, and the child who carried the mutation into a new world. As the night deepens and the world grows smaller, let the complexity of your own biology be a source of wonder. You are a miracle of ancient engineering, a vessel for 1,000 different adaptations that have been tested in the fires of the past. Whether your blood is Rh positive or Rh negative, you are part of a lineage that has refused to give up. You are the beneficiary of every trade-off and every hard-won advantage that your ancestors secured over tens of thousands of years. The mystery of your blood is the mystery of how we all got here. Through a series of narrow escapes and brilliant accidental discoveries. The silence of the night is a perfect mirror for the silence of our DNA. It doesn't announce its secrets. It simply carries them, pulse after pulse, through the duration of our lives. The heterozygote advantage is a testament to the fact that there is a purpose behind even our most baffling traits. We are a species of contradictions, a blend of strengths and vulnerabilities that somehow work together to keep the heart beating. As you move closer to sleep, let the tension of the day dissolve into the vast, ancient history of your cells. You are safe within the architecture of a body that has been refined by time and trial. The evolutionary struggle is a long, slow river, and we are just a few drops moving through the current. The Rh negative story is a reminder that the river has many paths, and that every path was carved with effort. There is a sense of belonging in this history, a realization that we are not alone in our struggles or our differences. We are all part of the same grand experiment, a mosaic of survivors who have found a way to turn an absence into an advantage. As we look toward the next part of our journey, moving into the tragic and royal history of the second-born and the myth of blue blood, carry with you this understanding of biological resilience. The history of the Rh negative protein is a story of how humanity has always found a way to thrive in the gaps and the shadows. It is a story of endurance, and it is a story that is still being told in every drop of blood that moves through the world tonight. The light of the stars above is ancient, and the blood within you is older Still, both are markers of a journey that began in the heart of a furnace and has led to this moment of quiet reflection. Rest now and let the rhythmic flow of your life connect you to the millions of ancestors who stood where you stand, breathed the same night air, and carry the same mysteries in their veins. You are the living proof of their success, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to survive, to adapt, and to dream. The flickering candlelight of a medieval manor or the drafty halls of a stone castle once held a recurring, silent tragedy that no physician of the era could diagnose, a heartbreak that seemed to strike at the very moment a family should have been celebrating its expansion. It was the mystery of the fading child, the second-born who arrived into the world struggling for breath, their skin tinged with a sickly yellow hue, their life slipping away despite the prayers of priests and the charms of midwives. We now recognize this as hemolytic disease of the newborn, the physical manifestation of rhesus incompatibility. But for centuries, it was a ghost that haunted the hallways of history. It was a biological tax on the Rh negative lineage, a sociological weight that shaped the inheritance of lands, the survival of dynasties, and the very concept of what it meant to have noble blood. In the rigid social structures of the Middle Ages, the loss of a second or third child was often interpreted as a divine judgment or a failure of the mother spirit. Yet, there was a curious pattern that emerged among the elite of Europe. Within the sprawling family trees of the Habsburgs, the Bourbons, and the various royal houses of the Atlantic fringe, the incidence of these tragic births seemed unusually high. It is here that the term blue blood begins to take on a layer of scientific intrigue. While the traditional explanation for the phrase refers to the pale, translucent skin of the aristocracy, which allowed their blue-tinted veins to show through, proving they did not labor in the sun, there is a deeper biological possibility. High concentrations of Rh negative blood within these insular intermarrying groups meant that blue blood was more than an aesthetic. It was a genetic signature that carried with it a specific and often precarious reproductive destiny. To be a royal in medieval Europe was to live in a gilded cage of genetics. To maintain power and land, cousins married cousins, and uncles married nieces, creating concentrated pools of DNA where rare traits like the Rh negative deletion could flourish and become dominant. In these closed circles, the risk of a mother developing antibodies against her own child's blood increased with every generation that sought to keep the line pure. History is filled with queens who were celebrated for their firstborn heirs, only to be cast aside or lamented when they failed to produce a spare. The psychological and political impact of this biological reality cannot be overstated. A dynasty could end not because of a war or a famine, but because of a tiny protein missing from the surface of a red blood cell. The weight of this history was carried in the circulatory systems of kings and peasants alike, but it was in the royal courts that it changed the course of nations. When an heir died, the map of Europe often shifted. Alliances were broken, wars of succession were sparked, and the balance of power tilted. We can look back at the sudden extinctions of certain noble lines and wonder how many were the result of this microscopic conflict. The divine right of kings was often at the mercy of a maternal immune system that did not recognize the crown, only the antigen. It is a humbling thought that the grand movements of history the borders of France, the sovereignty of Spain, the unification of England were all subject to the silent, objective laws of biology that were not yet understood. Yet, outside the castle walls, in the mud-walled cottages of the peasantry, the same drama was playing out with less fanfare but equal sorrow. In the isolated villages of the Pyrenees or the coastal hamlets of the British Isles, an Rh-negative woman would experience the same sequence of events. Her first child would be a miracle of health, but her subsequent pregnancies would become increasingly fraught in a world without the terminology of genetics. These patterns were woven into the local folklore. Tales of changelings or infants stolen by the fair folk may have been a way for grieving parents to process the sudden, inexplicable decline of a once healthy newborn. The folklore was a bridge, a way to cross the gap between a devastating reality and a human need for explanation. The concept of blue blood as a mark of the elite eventually became a sociological fortress. It served to distinguish the noble from the common, the ancient from the new. But as the nighttime historian, we can see the irony. The very trait that the aristocracy used to justify their superiority was often the same trait that made their lineages so fragile. The purity they sought was the very thing that made them susceptible to the biological conflict of the racist factor. They were protecting a legacy that was, by its very nature, a struggle to persist. The Rh-negative deletion was a badge of antiquity, yes, but it was also a badge of endurance against the self-imposed pressures of isolation. The transition from the medieval period to the dawn of modern medicine was a long, slow awakening. For centuries, the second-born tragedy was simply accepted as a part of the human condition, a mystery that lived in the blood. But as we moved into the age of enlightenment and the scientific revolution, the focus shifted from the mystical to the material. We began to count, to observe, and to categorize. We noticed that certain populations had different rates of infant survival, and we began to map the movement of these traits across the globe. The myth of blue blood began to dissolve under the lens of the microscope, replaced by the objective reality of antibodies and antigens. Yet, even as the science evolved, the weight of the history remained. The stories of the queens who could not provide an heir, and the families who watched their children fade, still linger in our cultural memory. They remind us that for most of human history, we were at the mercy of forces we could neither see nor name. Our ancestors walked through a world of shadows, carrying their rare and difficult blood as best they could, building empires and families in the face of a biological mystery that would not be solved for 1,000 years. The circulatory system is a closed loop, but it is also a window into the past. Every pulse of your heart is an echo of the pulses that came before. The hearts of the kings, the peasants, the hunters, and the voyagers. Whether your blood is Rh positive or Rh negative, you are the end result of a long line of survivors who navigated the complexities of their own biology. You are the firstborn who made it, the descendant of a lineage that found a way through the narrowest of gates. There is a profound sense of continuity in this realization, a feeling of being a single note in a vast, ancient symphony. As the night air grows still and the world retreats into the background, consider the resilience of those who came before you. They lived without the certainties of modern medicine, without the maps of the genome, and yet they moved forward. They carried the burden of the second-born and the myth of the blue blood with a quiet, dogged persistence. They were the architects of our world, and their blood is the foundation upon which we are built. In the quiet of your own room, you can feel the weight of that history, a gentle pressure that connects you to the generations of the past. The tragedy of the medieval nursery has been replaced by the efficiency of the modern clinic. But the human story is the same. It is a story of wanting to protect what we love, of trying to understand the mysteries of our own bodies, and of finding a way to endure. The Rh negative protein is a tiny detail in the grand scheme of the universe, but in the context of a human life, it has been a force of nature. It has shaped the way we see ourselves and the way we organize our societies. It has been a source of sorrow and a source of pride. In the shadows of the past, the fading child is finally at rest, and the blue blood has been revealed for what it truly is, a fascinating, rare variation in the human mosaic. We no longer need to fear the curse of the second-born, for we have learned the language of the blood. But as we close this chapter on the medieval struggle, let us not forget the courage of those who lived it. They were the ones who held the line, who kept the stories alive, and who passed the mystery down to us so that we might finally solve it. The stars above the ancient castles and the modern cities are the same stars that watched over the first Rh negative child 30,000 years ago. They have seen it all, the rise and fall of dynasties, the birth of legends, and the slow, steady progress of human knowledge. In their cold, distant light, our biological differences seem small, yet they are the very things that make our story so rich and so compelling. We are a species defined by our variations, a people made of 1,000 different threads, all woven together into a single, breathing reality. As you prepare for the final stages of sleep, let the images of the medieval world fade. The candlelight is extinguished, the stone halls are silent, and the blue blood is just a story told in the dark. You are safe in the present, carrying the strength of all those ancestors within you, a living archive of a history that has finally found its way into the light. Rest now, and let the pulse of your own life be the only rhythm you hear, a steady, peaceful beat that has survived the ages. The journey through the history of the rhesus factor is nearing its end, but the story of the blood is eternal. It is a river that never stops flowing, a mystery that never stops unfolding. In the next part, we will see how the 20th century finally broke the code and brought peace to the maternal-fetal conflict forever. But for now, just breathe. Just be. You are a part of the past, and you are the promise of the future. The 20th century dawned with a mechanical roar, a century defined by its obsession with breaking codes, from the cryptographic secrets of wartime to the very structure of the atom. Yet, for all our growing mastery over the physical world, the internal world of the human body remained a theater of ancient, unexplained tragedies. In the 1930s and 40s, the silence of the maternity ward was still too often broken by the heartbreak of erythroblastosis fetalis, the medical term for the rhesus war we have been tracing through the ages. But the gears of a revolution were finally turning. In the same decade that humanity learned to split the atom, we finally learned how to speak the language of the blood, turning a biological death sentence into a manageable footnote of modern medicine. The breakthrough did not come from a single moment of inspiration, but from the painstaking observations of men like Philip Levine and Rufus Stetson, who in 1939 encountered a woman whose body had reacted violently to a blood transfusion from her own husband after giving birth to a stillborn child. They realized that the mother's blood contained an antibody, a molecular sentinel that had been sensitized by the blood of her fetus. This was the smoking gun. It was the first time science had peered behind the curtain of the maternal-fetal conflict. They weren't looking at a curse or a genetic failure. They were looking at a highly efficient immune system doing exactly what it was designed to do, attacking a foreign protein it didn't recognize. The alien was the rhesus protein itself, and the Rh-negative mother was simply the defender of a protein-free realm. As the 1960s arrived, the focus shifted from diagnosis to prevention. In a remarkable instance of global collaboration, researchers in Liverpool and New York were simultaneously chasing a ghost. They wondered if they could trick the mother's immune system into ignoring the presence of the fetal Rh-positive cells. The solution was as elegant as it was counterintuitive. To prevent the mother from making her own long-lasting antibodies, they would inject her with pre-made antibodies, a substance that would eventually be known as ROGAM. These passive antibodies would seek out and mask any stray fetal cells in the mother's bloodstream before her own immune system could notice them. It was a molecular masquerade, a way to shield the child by quieting the mother's internal alarms. The first clinical trials of ROGAM in the mid-60s were a triumph of the human spirit over biological destiny. Women who had previously lost multiple children to the rhesus conflict were suddenly able to carry healthy, vibrant babies to term. The fading child of the medieval nursery was gone, replaced by the crying, healthy newborn of the modern clinic. This was the moment the Rh-negative lineage was finally freed from the reproductive tax it had paid for 30,000 years. The biological wall that had separated the Rh-negative islands of humanity from the Rh-positive mainland had been breached by a needle and a vial of clear fluid. The 20th century medical revolution didn't just save lives. It altered the very trajectory of our evolution, ensuring that rare genetic signatures could persist without the heavy price of infant mortality. The transition from a biological enigma to a manageable medical detail changed the way we perceive our own blood. For millennia, being different meant being at risk. Now, it simply meant a different box to check on a prenatal form. We moved from the era of blue blood myths and changeling folklore into an era of objective, standardized care. Yet, even as the mystery was solved, the rarity remained. The Rh-negative trait did not become more common. It simply became more secure. We have entered a period of genetic preservation, where the ancient markers of the Basque, the Berbers, and the Ice Age survivors are no longer under threat from their own reproductive complications. We are keeping the archives of the Paleolithic alive through the intervention of the modern age. This shift has a profound philosophical dimension. We are the first generations of humans who can actively negotiate with our own evolution. We have stepped out of the blind process of natural selection and into a space where we can choose which traits we value and protect. The Rh-negative protein, or its absence, is no longer a filter that determines who survives. It is a piece of heritage that we have decided is worth keeping. In the globalized world of the 21st century, where populations are mixing at an unprecedented rate, the Rh negative signature is being spread thinner across the globe. But it is doing so with a safety net that our ancestors could never have imagined. The preservation of this rare genetic heritage in the age of global connectivity is a testament to our maturing as a species. We no longer see diversity as a threat to be purged, but as a resource to be understood. Every Rh negative individual today is a living bridge between the deepest past and the technological future. They carry a molecular deletion that was born in the cold dark of 30 millennia ago, and they do so with the support of a medical infrastructure that represents the pinnacle of human ingenuity. It is a beautiful synthesis, the ancient no of the DNA molecule, meeting the modern yes of scientific progress. As the night continues its slow, rhythmic pulse, think of the millions of families for whom this medical breakthrough was the difference between a lifetime of grief and a lifetime of joy. The ROGAM shot is a small thing, a routine procedure in a brightly lit hospital, but it carries the weight of a 1,000-year-old struggle. It is the final answer to the maternal-fetal conflict, a peace treaty signed in the language of biochemistry. It allows the Rh negative lineage to walk forward into the future, unburdened by the shadows that haunted the royal courts and the peasant huts of the past. The silence of the modern laboratory is a productive silence, a place where the secrets of the genome are being mapped with increasing precision. We are finding that the Rh negative trait is just one of many silent markers that define our individual journeys. We are all made of these absences and presences, these tiny deviations that make us who we are. The 20th century taught us that we don't have to be victims of our biology. We can be its stewards. We can listen to the stories our blood is trying to tell and provide the ending that those stories deserve. The global connectivity of our era means that an Rh negative individual in Tokyo can share the same medical protocol as one in London or New York. We have created a global safety net for a local mutation. This is the macro scale of human compassion, an effort to ensure that no matter how rare your genetic signature might be, you have a place in the human story. The Rh negative lineage is no longer a fortress in the mountains. It is a thread in the global tapestry, woven with care and protected by the collective knowledge of our species. As you drift toward the final edges of wakefulness, let the tension of the biological struggle fade away. The war in the womb is over. The mystery has been decoded, and the solution is as common as the air we breathe. We are living in a time of unprecedented biological peace, a time where we can appreciate our differences without fear. The Rh negative protein is a ghost of the past, but it is a ghost that has been welcomed into the light of the present. It remains a fascinating anomaly, a subject of study and wonder, but it is no longer a source of sorrow. The history of the rhesus factor is a journey from the dark into the light, from mystery into understanding. It is a story that proves that even the most daunting biological challenges can be met with curiosity and collaboration. As we prepare for the final part of our journey, where we will look at the human genome as a cosmic archive, carry with you the sense of triumph that this medical revolution represents. We have learned to heal the rift in our own biology, and in doing so, We have honored every ancestor who ever struggled in the dark. The stars above are no longer the only lights in the night. The lights of our clinics and our laboratories are also shining, symbols of a species that refuse to accept no for an answer. We have rewritten the rules of our own survival, and the result is a world where every child can be a firstborn. A world where the blood is no longer a battlefield, but a shared river of life. Rest now in the security of this modern peace, knowing that the ancient conflict has been settled, and the future is open to all of us, regardless of the proteins on our cells. The night is deep and the world is quiet, but the pulse of progress is steady. You are part of a generation that has inherited the solutions to the problems of the ages. There is a profound rest to be found in that knowledge, a release of the old anxieties. Let the images of the past dissolve into the gentle, supportive reality of the present. You are safe, you are understood, and you are part of a story that has finally found its way home. In the final part, we will let the images fade entirely. We will look at the genome not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a masterpiece to be admired, a cosmic archive of everything we have ever been. But for now, just let the quiet of the 20th century victory settle over you, a peace that was won through the blood, and for the future of us all. We have traveled from the rugged, mist-shrouded peaks of the Pyrenees to the microscopic landscapes of the first chromosome, tracing a crimson thread that has wound its way through 30,000 years of human survival. As we reach the end of this journey, the scientific data, the migration maps, and the historical tragedies begin to pull away, leaving us with a much larger, more silent realization. Your own body is not just a biological machine. It is a cosmic archive, a living library that contains the echoes of every ancestor who ever managed to survive long enough to pass their story on to the next generation. Whether your blood carries the rhesus protein or defines itself by its absence, you are a walking miracle of continuity, a vessel for a history that has outlasted the glaciers and outshone the gold of empires. The historical tension of the Rh-negative mystery, the maternal-fetal conflict, the isolation of the Basque, the maritime drift of the Berbers, now begins to fade into the vastness of deep time. When we zoom out far enough, the differences that seemed so monumental in the laboratory or the royal court become subtle variations in a grand, beautiful symphony. We see a species that is not a monolith, but a shimmering mosaic. The Rh-negative deletion is simply one of the many ways the human story has branched and rejoined itself. A reminder that evolution is not a straight line toward perfection, but a wandering path filled with experiments, accidents, and surprising triumphs. We are all walking mysteries, carrying the chemical signatures of people whose names we will never know, but whose resilience is the reason we are breathing in the cool night air right now. The images of the past, the flint tools of the Cro-Magnon, the salt-stained sails of the Guanche, the gray alignments of Karnak, let them start to blur now. Let the sharp edges of facts and figures soften into a gentle, rhythmic hum. You don't need to remember the dates of the 1937 discovery or the specific linguistic roots of the Euskara language. You don't need to hold on to the mechanics of the RHD gene or the theories of parasite resistance. All of that knowledge has served its purpose. It has brought you to this moment of understanding, and now it can be released. The weight weight of history is no longer something you need to carry. You can let the details drift away like smoke into a dark sky, leaving only the quiet, steady pulse of your own existence. You are a part of the long, slow cooling of the world, a process of finding rest after an immense journey. The ancestors who carried the Rh negative trait through the Ice Age and the Bronze Age were not looking for answers. They were looking for a place to belong, a place to sleep in safety. And you have found that place. The biological struggles that defined their lives have been resolved by the passage of time and the progress of understanding. The war in the blood is over. The mystery is at peace. You can let your mind become as still as the high mountain valleys of the Pyrenees after the first snowfall, where every sound is muffled and every shadow is soft. Release the need to analyze. Release the need to categorize. You are simply a human being, a descendant of the stars and the soil, resting in the quiet heart of the universe. The genome is a masterpiece that is already finished. You are the living expression of that work. And for tonight, your only task is to exist. Feel the way your breath moves in and out, a slow and easy tide that has been flowing since the first breath was taken on this planet. There is a profound freedom in this surrender, a freedom to let go of the complexities of identity and simply sink into the restorative silence of the night. The archive of your DNA is safe. The history of the rhesus factor is etched into the very fabric of reality, and it does not require your constant attention to remain true. Like the megaliths standing in the dark, the truths of your heritage are unyielding and eternal. But they are also quiet. They do not demand anything from you. They are the foundation upon which you rest, the solid ground beneath your dreams. Let the images fade further now, until they are nothing but a soft, gray mist at the edge of your consciousness. You are drifting now, moving away from the world of names and toward the world of pure being. The history of the human race is a vast ocean, and you are a single drop within it, connected to everything, supported by everything, and yet perfectly at peace in your own unique space. There is no more struggle. There is no more conflict. There is only the long, slow invitation to sleep, to leave the world of the waking and enter the realm where time has no meaning. If you are still awake and you've enjoyed drifting through this piece of the past, you can gently tap the like button or subscribe. But for now, you don't need to do anything at all. You have traveled far enough. You have learned enough. The night is yours, and it is a space of total, unconditional rest. Let the silence wrap around you like a protective cloak, the same cloak that has sheltered every traveler throughout the ages. The stars will continue their slow turn. The blood will continue its quiet pulse, and the mysteries of the past will remain safe in the dark. Rest well. Good night.